One morning, scribbling, I wrote the first sentence of what later became Invisible Man. I'm an invisible man. And I played with that, started to reject it, but it intrigued me, and I began to put other things with it. And pretty soon, I had a novel going. I began to work out a conceptual outline of it, and as fast as I could work out the concepts, the incidents started flowing in on me.
All right, so I chose the novel Invisible Man by Ralph Waldo Ellison, and it was written in 1952, and it explores a lot of the social issues that African Americans had to face in the early 20th century. The novel discusses a lot of different concepts and ideas, but the main big three are self-identity, obliviousness, and of course race. But before we get into what the book really means, we have to look at the author because his life had a big impact on the novel itself. Alright, so Ralph Ellison was born in 1914, and he grew up in Oklahoma City, and he grew up with his mother and his siblings because his father died when he was very young. Ellison was a big lover of music. He went on to study it at the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, but he later moved to New York to pay off college expenses. And this is something that I found really interesting. His full name is Ralph Waldo Ellison, which is strikingly similar to Ralph Waldo Emerson, famed transcendentalist. This fact may have impacted Ellison's writing style, as he took on a whole new meaning of African American literature and identity that differed from the traditional literature at the time. So now that you know a little bit about the author, you can understand the message of Invisible Man as a whole. Just remember that this book is not like other civil rights novels. It moves as far away from the norm as possible. Ellison once said, if the Negro or any other writer is going to do what is expected of him, he's lost the battle before he takes the field. Ellison was big on individuality and self-identity. These points made Invisible Man what it is today. So written in 1952, but set in the 1930s, Invisible Man tells the story of a young, unnamed African-American man from the South who is granted a scholarship to a local black college where he is subsequently expelled. He then migrates to New York in search of work. He finally finds a job as a factory worker, but shortly finds himself responsible for an explosion at the factory. After this tragic incident, he finds work with an organization called the Brotherhood, a group working towards civil rights for African Americans in Harlem. For a short period of time, the narrator feels he has finally found his place in the world, but again, he is wrong. After a close friend from the Brotherhood named Todd Clifton is shot and killed by police, things really take a turn for the worse. The narrator is abandoned by the Brotherhood, and a large riot breaks out in Harlem. Stores are looted and buildings are destroyed, including their own headquarters. Towards the end of the novel, the narrator finally decides to stop taking part in the violence and escapes the riot through a manhole in the ground, where he remains hidden and invisible, but not by force, but by choice. Like for any novel, there are many important themes and symbols and motifs to think about, but for this book, the main ones are invisibility, blindness, and self-identity. Alright, so for invisibility, Ellison states in the very first chapter of the novel, I am invisible, understand simply because people refuse to see me. When they approach me, they see only my surroundings, themselves or figments of their imagination. Indeed, everything and anything except me. Ellison's definition of invisibility is the same as not being seen or respected by anyone around you. The narrator is invisible at first because people do not care to acknowledge his life as worthy. This ties into the next theme, which is blindness. Throughout the novel, Ellison showed us characters who see only what they want to see because their own personal prejudices blind them from reality. There is a point in the novel where a group of elderly and wealthy white men force the narrator and a group of boys into a battle royale situation where they brutally fight to the finish for their own amusement. The boys are blindfolded in this situation while they eagerly fight because they cannot see their own exploitation by these men. Ellison also includes a lot of other blind characters in the novel, literally and figuratively. Most because they cannot see past their own judgment, and others because they refuse to. Alright, so the last and probably biggest theme of the novel is self-identity. At a trying moment in the narrator's life, he says, when I discover who I am, I'll be free. And a few pages later, he says, I am who I am. The narrator is constantly traveling from place to place, from school to school, never really working at the same place for too long. Every place he has been up until the end of the novel, he has felt like an outcast, even in the face of his own people. Ellison makes it clear that knowing who you truly are in this world, finding your own place, makes you free. There are a few backwards connections that I noticed, one being the Harlem Riot of 1935 that was a result of police brutality and unfair conditions in Harlem. It influenced Ellison's Brotherhood riot that destroyed the same city as a result of police brutality. Some other connections that I found were the personal experiences of the author. Ellison moved to New York directly after college. This was a life-changing move for him. It made him become a writer. The narrator also moved to New York after college. It was also a life-changing move, but in some good ways and some bad. And lastly, there are some literary connections. Langston Hughes' The Weary Blues, which is a poem and a book written in 1926, fostered a new Black cultural identity in literature, just like Invisible Man did. And it was also very interesting that I found out that Langston Hughes and Ralph Ellison were actually friends in real life. There are many forward connections one can make with this novel, including 21st century police brutality, like the murder of Mike Brown, Philando Castile, Tamir Rice, Alton Sterling, and Eric Gardner, and countless others. Just as the murder of the narrator's brother from the Brotherhood, Todd Clifton, by police officers. Another connection one can make is a social issue, like the rape and sexual assault of women. During the Battle Royale scene, a female stripper is hired by the men and she is sexually assaulted, yet no one does anything to help her. This reminded me a lot of the Me Too movement that is currently working in our society, as it works to help women and men who have been sexually assaulted. Another connection that can be made is towards the issue of molestation and child abuse. A character named Jim Trueblood impregnates his own daughter and nothing is done about it. This reminded me of the child abuse epidemic that goes on in our world today. Very little or nothing is done about the issue. Lastly, a pop culture reference is made in the show Everybody Hates Chris when he is assigned to read Invisible Man but tries to get out of it by watching the movie. But there's no movie for it. He watches The Invisible Man instead and gets an F for his project. So the final question is, why do we learn about this today? What makes this significant to American literature? Well, race has always been an issue in America and will most likely always be an issue in America as America becomes more diverse. But the more perspectives we see and from different time periods, the better we will be at tolerating these differences. The purpose of this novel is to, of course, invoke thought about society. Any great book does that. And it's also to encourage us to acknowledge the differences in others because, like I said, as we become more diverse, there's always going to be something different. We have to learn how to tolerate that. We have to learn how to accept that. And this book teaches you that. This book also teaches you how to understand one's own self-identity to the fullest. Because like I said before, or like Ellison said before, knowing who you are as a person, as your own person, not as a group, but as yourself, makes you free.